Good day everyone, we're thrilled to present this project constellation aligning GHG goals for Michelin and key suppliers, a strategic framework for value chain decarbonization and resilient growth. We are the Ladmonix team. My name is Adi Emirut and I'm joined by my talented colleagues Abdullahi Abdulfatah, Toto Olaoluwaseyi and Egoase Harrison. Project Constellation creates a unified decarbonization framework, turning transactional relationships with ExxonMobil, Bucket and Duke Energy into a collaborative network. It addresses risks from misaligned targets and data through three pillars: the Constellation Ledger for real-time emissions tracking using blockchain and AI, a one-page supply chain sustainability cooperation agreement for joint planning, and a value-based model linking verified performance to incentives like preferred status. This ensures data comparability, accountability, and progress towards Michelin Scope 3 reductions. Key challenges include supplier misalignment with varying targets and limited Scope 3 coverage, against Michelin's minus 47% Scope 1 and 2, minus 28% Scope 3 by 2030, and net zero by 2050. Fragmented data lacks consistency, engagement remains transactional without shared milestones, and risk threatens over 71% of Michelin's Scope 3 progress plus regulatory compliance under CSRD and IFRS S2. The solution integrates three pillars: the Constellation Ledger for immutable, real-time tracking of emissions across scopes 1 to 3, a one-page ISCEA formalizing governance, joint investment and accountability, and a commercial model embedding verified performance into procurement with incentives, quarterly reviews and penalties to align with Michelin's 2030 and 2050 targets. Implementation directs Michelin's commitment with verifiable Scope 3 pathways and compliance. It improves data comparability and assurance, drives supplier execution via scorecards and incentives, and expect at least 10% CO2 reduction in pilots by 2027. This fosters efficiencies, innovation in low carbon tech, and a resilient network for competitive advantage and cost savings. Why supplier alignment matters? Over 70% of Michelin's footprint is in upstream Scope 3, linked to supplier performance. Misalignment in ambition, baselines and data undermine 71.16% Scope 3 progress and 22.33% towards 2050. Alignment enables verifiable data, joint innovation, and resilience against regulatory, reputational, and operational risks.
Mapping the upstream value network and emission flows. This maps the network centered on Michelin, integrating inputs from ExxonMobil for energy and feedstocks, Progress for steel materials, and Duke Energy for electricity. With emission flows requiring aligned tracking, a decarbonization imperative. Establishing a single source of truth. The network focuses on Michelin producing tires from supplier inputs. ExxonMobil fuels and petrochemicals embed Scope 3 in Michelin. Baker Steel carries Scope 1 and 2 as purchased goods, and Duke Energy defines Scope 2. Public disclosures from 2023-2024 reports establish baselines for transparency. Michelin, headquartered in France, leads in the manufacturing across 170 plus countries, manages Scopes 1-3 upstream. ExxonMobil in Texas supplies fuels, chemicals, and feedstocks like butane and operational emissions, embedding in Michelin Scope 3. Burkhardt, located in Belgium, specializes in steel wire for tire reinforcements, focusing on recycled content with emissions in Michelin's purchased goods. And Duke Energy in North Carolina supplies electricity to Michelin's plants, determining Scope 2 intensity from its 58,200 megawatts portfolio. Relevant sites, operations, and available public GHG disclosure. Michelin US and European hubs report 71.60% Scope 3 progress with third-party assurance. ExxonMobil's Gulf Coast site shows 81.6% operational reductions. At Baker's facilities, target minus 46% Scope 1 and Scope 2. Duke Energy achieves 44% from 2005 base, expanding renewables. Using GHG protocols, ExxonMobil and Baker's emissions embed as Michelin Scope 3 category 1. Duke defines Scope 2, and over 70% of footprint in purchased goods and services prioritize alignment to avoid gaps, ensuring chain of custody and comparability.
Assessing GHG targets, baselines, and reporting integrity. This section evaluates GHG targets, baselines, and reporting integrity across Michelin and its key suppliers to identify alignment opportunities. Benchmarking ambition, scope coverage, and verification across the value network. GHG targets vary significantly. Michelin uses SBTi validated absolute targets for Scope 1 to 3 ExxonMobil focus on absolute and intensity targets for scope 1 and 2 only, with no scope 3 commitment. Bekaert has SBTi absolute targets for scope 1 and 2 and partial scope 3. Duke Energy sets absolute reduction for scope 1 and 2 with partial scope 3. ISCEA differ 2019/2010 for Michelin, 2016 for ExxonMobil, 2019 for Bekaert and 2005 for Duke. Assurance levels also vary, impacting comparability. Michelin and ExxonMobil lead in progress, while Bekaert and Duke show moderate to strong advancements. Michelin's targets are absolute, based on 2019 for near-term and 2010 referenced. By 2030, minus 47% scopes 1 and 2, minus 28% scope 3 purchased goods and services, net zero by 2050 across all scopes. Progress: 71.16% achieved in scope 3 purchased goods and services, 22.33% toward 2050 total. Reporting in metric tons CO2 emission with SBTi validation and third-party assurance. ExxonMobil uses absolute targets for scopes 1 and 2, intensity based for methane and production. Base year 2016 targets minus 20% CO2 absolute by 2030 for scopes 1 and 2, intensity reductions up to minus 40%, net zero scopes 1 and 2 by 2050 intensity focused. No formal scope 3 target, though approximately 530 mt CO2 emission disclosed. Progress: 81.6% of operational reduction achieved. Assurance is internal and regional via annual reports. Bekaert targets are absolute. Base year 2019, minus 46% scopes 1 and 2 by 2030, net zero by 2050, partial scope 3 coverage. Progress includes increased renewables and moderate overall advancements, SBTi validated with third-party annual verification. Duke Energy sets absolute targets. Base year 2005, 50% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050, scopes 1 and 2 focus with partial scope 3. Progress: 44% reduction achieved, expanding renewables, assurance regional and internal with partial third-party elements.
We now move to the top 5 gap analysis. Aligning ambition, data, and execution. Prioritizing misalignments across 5 key GHG dimensions to drive targeted interventions. This analysis contrasts public disclosure on ambition, scope, data, milestones, and capabilities. It quantifies impact on Michelin scope 3 and prioritizes fixes by materiality and feasibility, forming the basic for our improvement roadmap. Number 1 on the list is the target ambition. Suppliers limits to scope 1 to 2. Action: it requires SBTi aligned scope 3. Number 2 is boundary and scope. Varied base years and scope 3. Actions: harmonize to 2010 to 2020. Number 3 is data quality. Inconsistent assurance. Action: mandate third-party annual disclosure. Number 4, milestones and incentives. No links to Michelin goals. Actions: embed procurement incentives. Number 5 is capability and financing. Tech and policy gaps. Action: launch joint R&D and partnership. Japan limits upstream. Action for Michelin minus 28% scope 3. Gap 2 prevents accurate aggregation due to baseline and scope divergences, risking SBTi compliance. Gap 3 reduces scope 3 reliability with varied verification. Gap 4 and 5 creates uneven pace without incentives or shared capabilities. Priority actions: mandate scope 3, harmonize baselines, require verification, embed incentives, and launch joint projects.
Implementing improvements and cooperation. Outlining execution through governance, technology, and incentives. Project Constellation deploys the ledger for standardized data, establishes joint sustainability governance board for reviews, adopts green supplier scorecards with incentives and penalties, and initiates joint projects like CCS, renewable steel, and PPAs. Owners ensure data assurance, accountability, and risk reduction. These are the proposed actionable fixes with owners. Fix 1. Require SBTI Scope 3 targets. The owners, Michelin Procurement and Suppliers, ESG. Fix 2. Harmonize baselines via Ledger. Owners, Joint Board and Michelin Analytics. Fix 3. Mandate third-party disclosures. Owners, Joint Board and Auditors. Fix 4. Embed procurement incentives via scorecards. Owners, Michelin Procurement and Suppliers Commercial. Fix 5. Launch joint R&D and financing. Owners, Michelin Innovation and Suppliers teams.
Execution mechanisms for fixes. Accountability via CEO sponsored board and dashboard. Mechanisms. Scope 3 letter in 6 months. Baseline normalization Q4 2025. Unified templates 2025. Risk mitigation and enforcement measures. Full adoption by 2027. 80% compliance, non-compliance 90-day remediation or termination, and the capability is $50 million fund with grants. The policy is joint advocacy team. Moving on to the milestone and roadmap. By 2025, deploy Ledger, onboard suppliers, pilot data, and establish board. Then 2026, execute pilots for 10% reduction, launch scorecards. 2027, governance integration. Then 2028 to 2030, full scorecards, 80% compliance, validate 2030 targets. Then now we move on to the proposed KPIs. The core KPIs include carbon intensities reduction, 100% verified data quarterly, 80% milestone achievement, 3 joint initiatives by 2027, full third-party assurance. The advanced KPI includes 90% forecasting accuracy, 75% bonus activation, 0 misalignment incidents, then cost savings. Expected impacts are 10% pilot reduction by 2027, full assured disclosure for compliance, 80% compliance by 2028, 0 incidents. Then the long term, we have the 90% forecasting, innovation in low carbon tech, cost savings, and resilient network for net zero 2050.
The one-page supply chain sustainability corporate agreements. This draft of the supply chain sustainability cooperation agreement between Michelin, ExxonMobil, Beckett, and Duke Energy. It commits all parties to jointly decarbonize Michelin's upstream Scope 3 emissions in support of Michelin's SBTI validated targets, minus 47% Scope 1 and 2 by 2030 from 2019 base, minus 28% Scope 3 purchased goods and services by 2030, and net zero by 2050. Article 1 requires SBTI aligned Scope 3 targets within 12 months, which baselines harmonize to 2015 midpoint via the Constellation Ledger. Article 2 mandates quarterly Scope 1 to 3 data uploads in a unified template, 100% third-party verified annually with AI flag issues resolved in 30 days. Article 3 establish a joint sustainability governance board with 1 executive per party, quarterly meetings, and 50-50 co-funded pilots for CCS, renewable steel, and PPAs. Article 4 integrates green supplier scorecards into contracts with KPIs on CO2 emission per ton, renewable percentage, and data compliance. Incentives offer plus 5 to 10% volume for greater than 80% milestones. Penalties minus 5% for less than 60% or audit failure, plus a joint annual report. This agreement runs for a 3-year renewable term, terminable for material breach after 90-day cure. Signature for all parties are required.
Balancing short-term and long-term competitive advantage. During the short-term, transparent data, cost efficiencies, 10% reductions, risk mitigation. And the long-term, forecasting accuracy, proprietary innovations, sustained alignments for profitability and leadership. Conclusion: Project Constellation creates a collaborative network ensuring Michelin's targets through Ledger, ISCEA, and incentives accelerating decarbonization, reducing risks, and driving innovation and growth. Thank you for your attention.